In a reality where massive beings walk upon the ground and corrupted celestial entities lead humanity astray, a single individual serves as the connection linking the heavens to our world. This individual is Enoch. His narrative starts well before his well-known vanishing. Though the Book of Genesis offers merely 5 verses concerning Enoch, complete volumes exist describing his existence that never found their way into the Bible we use today. These writings disclose that Enoch functioned as an overlooked prophet, a recorder for the divine realm, and someone who observed universal happenings that would shape the destiny of all humankind. However, before we proceed further, please take a quick moment to give this video a like and hit subscribe, though only if you truly appreciate the content I create here. Like always, I would absolutely love to know your location. Feel free to share in the comments section below. Let everyone know your current location and the time where you are. This genuinely helps us recognize the worldwide community we truly represent. I appreciate you being here with me today. Now, without any more delay, let's begin. The individual who journeyed alongside the divine, just 5 verses. That represents everything Genesis chapter 5 provides us. 5 verses, sharing information about an individual named Enoch, representing the 7th descendant following Adam. The passage proceeds swiftly through the family lineage. Enoch reached 65 years of age and fathered Methuselah. Following that particular birth, a transformation occurred. The Holy Writing states he journeyed with the divine for 300 years. What follows is the statement that has created confusion among those who read it for thousands upon thousands of years. Enoch journeyed alongside the divine, and then he was gone, because the divine took him away. There's no death mentioned, no burial described, no tomb recorded, only an emptiness where a death record ought to appear. Each additional name found in Genesis 5 adheres to an identical structure. These individuals lived their lives, they produced children, and then they perished. This formula echoes repeatedly, like rhythmic drumming throughout the entire chapter, yet upon arriving at Enoch, this established pattern shatters. The passage will not declare that he died. Rather, it declares, "The divine took him." Such briefness generates mystery. Those who read in ancient times recognize the absence right away. These 5 verses found in Genesis chapter 5, verses 18 through 24, generate far more questions than any answers they supply. What exactly does journeying with the divine signify? How can a person journey so completely with the divine that death itself becomes something bypassed? This Hebrew expression employed here, journeyed with the divine, shows up only once more throughout Genesis when describing Noah. These 2 individuals both received this uncommon honor. Both existed during eras marked by tremendous corruption. Both stood distinctly separate from the people of their time. The Jewish heritage maintained through the Septuagint, that ancient translation into Greek, finished during the 3rd century before the Common Era, translates this expression as Enoch brought pleasure to the divine. This particular translation emphasizes the relational component. Journeying alongside the divine signified existing in alignment with sacred purpose. It represented righteousness during an era filled with evil. It meant remaining faithful even as the surrounding world turned away from what was holy. Yet the mystery grows deeper upon examining the numerical values. Enoch existed for 365 years in total. Every single other patriarch found in Genesis 5 survived much longer spans. Adam achieved 930 years. Methuselah, who was Enoch's son, maintains the longest record at 969 years. However, Enoch departed at merely 365. This number by itself attracts notice. A solar year contains 365 days. Those reading in ancient times recognize symbolic meaning within this figure. Enoch experienced 1 year corresponding to each day within the year, almost as if his complete existence represented one full universal cycle. The passage provides us one additional detail. The divine took him away. This Hebrew verb employed in this passage, lakach, signifies to take, to receive, to retrieve. It matches the identical verb used many centuries afterward when Elijah got taken upward in the whirlwind. This was not some natural departure. This represented divine involvement. This was the divine, reaching downward and extracting someone from the typical progression of human death. Those interpreting in early Jewish times grasped that something remarkable took place with Enoch. The Book of Sirach, composed approximately 180 years before the Common Era, references Enoch as a model of repentance and a demonstration for coming generations. The letter addressed to the Hebrews within the New Testament, written during the 1st century of the Common Era, declares that through faith Enoch got taken upward so he wouldn't experience death. The writer includes that prior to his removal he received confirmation as having brought pleasure to the divine. These 5 verses transformed into a doorway. Scribes and prophets from ancient times stepped through this doorway into enormous collections of visions and divine disclosures. They pose the questions that the Genesis passage stimulates without providing answers. What exactly did Enoch observe throughout those 300 years of journeying alongside the divine? What understanding did he acquire? What assignments did he carry out? For what reason was he deemed deserving of such an extraordinary reward? The account in Genesis places Enoch within a particular historical time frame. His existence occurred prior to that great deluge. He observed the beginning chapters of human society. Based on the family records, his birth happened merely 654 years following Adam's departure from the garden. He existed throughout humanity's initial age, when individuals still held memories of Eden, when human lifespan extended across multiple centuries, when the separation between the heavens and our world appeared less solid. The name of his son, Methuselah, contains a prophetic message. According to interpretations from ancient times, Methuselah signifies when his death occurs, it shall arrive. Jewish heritage maintains that Methuselah perished during the identical year the flood commenced. Should this interpretation prove accurate, then Enoch possessed knowledge regarding the approaching divine judgment. He named his offspring as a breathing timeline. Each year that Methuselah continued living represented another year of mercy prior to the arrival of those waters. This background holds importance for comprehending Enoch's narrative. His life didn't unfold during peaceful times. The passage immediately following his removal portrays the corruption leading toward the flood. Genesis chapter 6 begins with the mysterious description of divine sons selecting human wives. Violence consumed the earth. Evil became widespread. Enoch journeyed alongside the divine throughout this descent toward disorder. He maintained faithfulness, even as the world crumbled around him. The writers of the New Testament recognized within Enoch a model for those who believe. Jude, composing during the 1st century, references an ancient writing attributed to Enoch, identifying him as a prophet who delivered messages about the ultimate judgment. This reference originates from a composition we will investigate thoroughly, a writing that ancient groups valued but contemporary Bibles exclude. Peter's 2nd letter similarly hints at Enoch's instruction when addressing the angels who committed sins and got thrown into darkness. What created Enoch's uniqueness? The passage highlights his journey alongside the divine. This wasn't some singular instant of belief. This represented 3 centuries of unwavering dedication. Day following day, year following year, decade following decade, Enoch preserved his connection with the sacred. Within a world sliding toward brutality and moral decay, he continued walking the holy pathway. During an age when humanity abandoned its maker, he maintained remembrance. While others chased their personal ambitions, he chased righteousness. His extraction from the world without undergoing death distinguishes him from virtually all human experience. Only the prophet Elijah possesses this same distinction throughout the Hebrew Bible. Both individuals got taken away. Both circumvented the tomb. Both were regarded as righteous during corrupt times. Both experienced remarkable encounters with the sacred dimension prior to their departure. These 5 verses form a description of remarkable holiness. They portray someone who rose above typical human boundaries through remaining faithful. They indicate a fate surpassing death for those journeying intimately with the divine. They suggest understanding and experiences that the short Genesis description cannot hold. Those reading in ancient times comprehended that these 5 verses were not where Enoch's narrative concluded. They represented the starting point. The Genesis passage supplied the base structure, the essential facts, the framework. However, the complete description of what Enoch witnessed, what he discovered, what he accomplished throughout those 300 years of journeying alongside the divine, that narrative got preserved within other writings. Writings that Jewish groups treasured across the centuries, writings that early followers of Christ examined and referenced, writings that ultimately dropped from the scriptural canon yet never vanished completely. The individual who journeyed alongside the divine left more than merely 5 verses behind. He left an entire collection of visions, a documentation of universal travels, a declaration against corrupted angels, and an assurance of ultimate judgment. The Genesis description introduces Enoch to us. However, to truly comprehend him, we need to go much deeper. We need to investigate the writings that ancient groups believed contained his genuine words, his genuine experiences, his genuine assignment. Enoch was not merely taken away. He underwent transformation. He was not merely extracted from the earth. He received a position within heaven. He became a recorder, an observer, a prophet, and based on certain traditions, an angel in his own right. His narrative starts with 5 verses within Genesis. Yet it reaches across numerous books, numerous visions, and numerous travels throughout both the heavens and the earth. To comprehend the individual who journeyed alongside the divine, we first need to comprehend the reality he inhabited. We need to investigate the corruption he observed, the judgment he forecasted, and the holy understanding he obtained. The Genesis description provides the framework. Those lost books of Enoch supply the particulars. Combined together, they present the full narrative of the 7th from Adam, the individual, the divine, cherished so deeply that death itself could not be allowed to reach him. The forgotten collection of Enoch. Apart from those 5 verses within Genesis, a different assemblage of writings surfaced. Jewish communities from ancient times valued these compositions. They identified them as the words of Enoch. They reproduced them, examined them, and transmitted them across multiple generations. These writings, recognized together as the Enochian literature, constitute one of the most substantial collections of apocalyptic composition from the ancient era. The body of work separates into multiple distinct compositions. The biggest and most significant is First Enoch, occasionally identified as Ethiopic Enoch, since the full manuscript endured in the Ge'ez language of Ethiopia. This book holds 5 primary sections. The Book of the Watchers, covering chapters 1 through 36, narrates corrupted angels and universal travels. The Book of Parables, spanning chapters 37 through 71, displays visions regarding ultimate judgment and an enigmatic figure identified as the Son of Man. The Astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82, discloses the patterns of celestial objects. The Book of Dream Visions, chapters 83 through 90, retells history using symbolic animals. The Epistle of Enoch, chapters 91 through 108, presents ethical guidance and prophecy. Researchers currently comprehend that these portions got written during different periods by different writers. The most ancient segments, especially the Book of the Watchers and the Astronomical book, probably originate from the 3rd or beginning of the 2nd century before the Common Era, following scholarly examination of manuscript evidence discovered at Qumran. The Book of Parables displays greater complexity. No portions of this section appeared at Qumran, creating substantial scholarly discussion. Certain researchers have suggested dates reaching as late as the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era, although most current scholars support composition during the 1st century, either before or following the Common Era, with this question staying unresolved. The dream visions and the epistle likely originate from the 2nd century before the Common Era, during or immediately following the era of persecution beneath Antiochus Epiphanes. These dating calculations derive from meticulous examination of language structure, theological content, and historical mentions within the writings. The Book of Dream Visions, as an example, unmistakably portrays happenings from the Maccabean uprising using animal symbolism. This supplies a terminus post quem, a moment following which the writing must have been composed. The lack of mentions to subsequent Roman control indicates composition prior to that time frame. Researchers employ such evidence to build chronologies. Across the centuries, these writings existed mainly in portions and translations. Greek segments survived within quotations by church leaders. Certain passages showed up in Byzantine manuscripts, yet the complete writing appeared lost. Then arrived the discovery at Qumran. Throughout 1947 and 1956, Bedouin shepherds alongside archaeologists retrieved hundreds of scrolls from caves located near the Dead Sea. Within these Dead Sea scrolls appeared countless copies of Enochian writings. The Qumran group, most likely the Essenes, treasured these compositions. Portions from no fewer than 20 separate manuscripts of 1st Enoch appeared within the caves. Only the scriptural books of Psalms and Deuteronomy show up with greater frequency throughout the collection. This indicates the group regarded Enoch's words as authoritative, holy writing. The manuscripts originate from the 3rd century before the Common Era, extending to the 1st century of the Common Era, verifying that these writings circulated extensively throughout ancient Judaism. The existence of Aramaic portions proved especially meaningful. Aramaic represented the everyday language of Jewish groups throughout the Second Temple era. Discovering Enoch writings in Aramaic proved their Palestinian beginning and early origin. These were not late inventions. These were ancient Jewish writings that existed before Christianity by multiple centuries. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintained the single, complete edition of 1st Enoch. For this group, the book never surrendered its canonical position. It continues as part of their scriptural canon even today. Ethiopian Christians reproduced and maintained the full composition when it vanished in other places. Their manuscripts, although significantly later in origin than the Qumran portions, hold the complete writing that researchers currently examine. Apart from 1st Enoch, additional Enochian compositions existed. 2nd Enoch, maintained in Old Church Slavonic, portrays Enoch's travel throughout the heavens with greater precision. This writing probably began in 1st century Egypt and demonstrates Greek impact. It displays Enoch's climb through 7 heavens, his change into an angelic entity, and his dictation of books toward his sons, prior to returning to heaven for eternity. 3rd Enoch, a Hebrew composition from approximately the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era, adopts a different method. It portrays Enoch's change into the angel Metatron, the lesser deity, the prince of the sacred presence. This later writing demonstrates how Jewish mysticism kept developing. Enochian traditions, even following the earlier compositions, had been dismissed by Rabbinic Judaism. The Book of Jubilees, an additional Second Temple writing discovered at Qumran, displays Enoch as the initial human to acquire writing and understanding. Following Jubilees, Enoch provided testimony opposing the Watchers, documented the sacred condemnation, and got taken toward the Garden of Eden to function as an observer until the ultimate judgment. This description shaped how subsequent groups comprehended Enoch's function. Portions of another composition surfaced at Qumran. The Book of Giants, recognized from 6 fragmentary manuscripts in Aramaic, broadens the narrative of the Nephilim. This writing, which shaped subsequent Manichaean literature, portrays the giant children of the Watchers experiencing troubling dreams regarding the approaching flood. The giants request Enoch to explain these dreams, and he provides the announcement of their coming destruction. For what reason did these writings hold such importance for ancient groups? They confronted questions the scriptural passage generated without supplying answers. They supplied particulars regarding the era preceding the flood. They clarified the beginning of evil. They portrayed the arrangement of the universe. They presented hope for ultimate justice. They maintained what ancient readers trusted were Enoch's genuine words and visions. The Enochian literature influenced Jewish thinking throughout the Second Temple era. Concepts regarding angels, demons, the beginning of wrongdoing, the ultimate judgment, and the Messiah discovered expression within these writings prior to their appearance in subsequent rabbinic literature or Christian compositions. The letter of Jude within the New Testament references directly from 1 Enoch chapter 1, verse 9. The writer regards Enoch's words as prophetic, holy writing. Early church leaders such as Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria recognized 1 Enoch as genuine. However, these writings ultimately surrendered their position within most scriptural canons. Rabbinic Judaism, forming following the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, shifted away from apocalyptic literature. The rabbis concentrated on the Torah and forming oral traditions. Writings such as Enoch, containing their focus on angelic uprising and universal mysteries, dropped from acceptance. They appeared too dualistic, overly concentrated on supernatural wickedness, overly theoretical regarding heavenly subjects. Christianity adopted a comparable direction. Early believers appreciated Enochian writings, yet as the Church established its canon during the 4th century, most groups eliminated these compositions. Only Ethiopia preserved them. The explanations for elimination differed. Certain church leaders doubted the writing's authenticity. Additional leaders expressed concern regarding their instruction on angels and demons. Still, additional leaders merely adhered to the developing agreement that supported the Hebrew scriptures acknowledged by Jewish authorities. However, the impact never genuinely vanished. Medieval Jewish mysticism extracted from Enochian traditions. Christian apocalyptic thinking returned toward Enochian subjects. Islamic traditions regarding the prophet Idris maintained Enochian components. When researchers rediscovered these writings during the contemporary period, they located a missing connection in comprehending Jewish and Christian formation. The forgotten collection of Enoch signifies beyond historical interest. These writings maintain ancient Jewish interpretation of the Genesis narrative. They reveal to us how groups prior to and throughout the era of Jesus comprehended wrongdoing, judgment, and salvation. They disclose the universal perspective that influenced apocalyptic anticipation. They prove that ancient readers recognized significantly more within those 5 Genesis verses than contemporary readers frequently observe. Following the writings themselves, Enoch composed 366 books. The Astronomical book asserts this figure particularly. These books held all understanding, all wisdom, all the mysteries of heaven and earth. The majority of that collection is gone. What remains, 1 Enoch, 2 Enoch, portions of the Book of Giants, signifies merely a portion of what ancient heritage attributed to the 7th from Adam. The emergence of the Watchers. The narrative commences prior to the flood, throughout the beginning generations of humanity. Genesis chapter 6 begins with a disturbing description. The sons of the divine observed that the daughters of humans possessed beauty. They selected wives from their number, whomever they desired. The passage is short. The implications prove enormous. Who were these sons of the divine? What did their behaviors set into motion? The Book of the Watchers supplies responses. Following this ancient writing, the sons of the divine were angels. More precisely, a classification of angels identified as watchers. Their designation originates from their function. They observed humanity. They watched the earth from the celestial dimension. However, observation proved insufficient for them. They craved what they witnessed. 200 angels formed an agreement. Their commander was Seamyaza, chief among their number. Additional commanders included Azazel, Armoros, Barachiel, and numerous others. The writing catalogues their designations, 20 in total, each commanding 10 angels beneath their authority. These were not insignificant spirits, these were mighty entities from the sacred council. They possessed positions of power within the celestial hierarchy. The Book of the Watchers portrays their arrival. They descended toward Mount Hermon throughout the days of Jared, Enoch's father. The setting holds significance. Mount Hermon rises throughout the distant north of ancient Canaan, establishing the separation between the promised territory and the areas beyond. Its snow-covered summits created it a location of mystery and might. The designation Hermon might originate from the Hebrew term for devoted to destruction, or curse. Whether the mountain received naming for what transpired there, or the happening provided the mountain, its threatening designation, the connection between location and corruption, became lasting. Prior to descending, the Watchers secured themselves with a vow. They pledged loyalty toward their scheme. Each committed to proceed through with the arrangement and divide the responsibility equally. This particular detail demonstrated significance. They recognized their behavior broke the universal arrangement. They grasped the ramifications. However, they selected to advance regardless. The vow secured them collectively in wrongdoing. None could assert innocence or lack of awareness. For what reason did they proceed? The Book of the Watchers indicates craving. They witnessed human women and desired them. However, craving by itself fails to clarify such an organized uprising. These were entities who stood within the divine presence. They recognized sacred purpose. They grasped the separations between heaven and earth. Their violation was not impulse. It represented deliberate uprising. Certain interpretations indicate arrogance drove them. They witnessed humans as lesser beings, however observed the divine favor these entities. Maybe resentment developed. Maybe they attempted to contaminate what the divine had created. Maybe they desired to form their personal lineage, their personal heritage. The passage fails to clearly declare their deeper drives. It reveals to us their behaviors and their ramifications. The Watchers arrived to Earth and executed their scheme. They selected human wives. They instructed their wives prohibited understanding. They broke the separation between sacred and human. This separation was not random. It preserved the appropriate arrangement of creation. Angels exist within the celestial dimension. Humans exist on Earth. The combining of these arrangements brought disorder into reality. Those reading in ancient times grasped the theological meaning. The Watchers' wrongdoing reflected the wrongdoing within the garden. Eve consumed the prohibited fruit to transform like the divine, to obtain understanding designated for the sacred. The Watchers carried understanding downward to earth, distributing what ought to have stayed in heaven. Both violations concerned crossing separations. Both carried corruption. Both resulted in judgment. The vow the Watchers pledged on Mount Hermon transformed into a representation of structured uprising. This was not personal wrongdoing. This represented conspiracy. The angels strategized collectively, perpetrated collectively, and descended collectively. Their unity in transgression created them more hazardous. It similarly created their judgment more absolute. None could assert they got misled. All engaged willingly. The figure 200 possesses meaning in ancient number symbolism. It signifies completion and abundance. These were not merely a handful of rebellious angels. This represented a considerable segment of the Watcher classification. The uprising was extensive and structured. The passage highlights this to demonstrate the magnitude of the universal emergency that arrived afterward. Seamyaza's commanding function demands consideration. His designation signifies, "My name is rebellion," or "he witnessed the name." Subsequent tradition occasionally blames Azazel beyond Seamyaza. However, the Book of the Watchers unmistakably recognizes Seamyaza as the originator and leader. He suggested the scheme. He structured the vow. He guided the arrival. His descent from favor mirrors Satan's descent in subsequent Christian tradition, although the writings fail to clearly link them. The Mount Hermon location links the narrative to physical terrain. Those reading in ancient times recognized this mountain. They could observe it, travel to it, indicate toward it. The narrative was not transpiring within some legendary dimension. It transpired here within the actual reality at a particular setting. This establishment in actual terrain created the description more immediate and disturbing. Wickedness entered reality not through theoretical powers, rather through actual behaviors at a particular location. The vow itself warrants reflection. Throughout ancient Near Eastern culture, vows possessed ultimate might. To pledge a vow meant to secure oneself completely. Shattering a vow carried curse and destruction. The Watchers recognized this. Through pledging their vow, they created their uprising permanent. They selected condemnation as a collective. This group selection highlights their responsibility and their discipline. The chronology of the arrival throughout the days of Jared positions the happening within the particular family timeline. Jared was Enoch's father, the sixth generation following Adam. This signifies Enoch was existing, potentially already born when the Watchers descended. He observed the commencement of the corruption. He witnessed the angels arrive. He comprehended from direct observation what his compositions would subsequently condemn. The Book of the Watchers displays this arrival as the crucial instant in early human experience. Everything that arrives afterward, the brutality, the corruption, the flood, connects back toward this behavior. The Watchers' rebellion initiated powers that nearly eliminated humanity completely. Their selection on Mount Hermon transformed into the universal violation that characterized an age. For what reason did the divine allow this? The passage fails to declare. It displays the happening as occurring, as shattering the sacred arrangement, yet fails to investigate why the angels possessed the liberty to create such a selection. Afterward, Jewish and Christian theology would struggle with questions of angelic liberty and sacred foreknowledge. The Book of the Watchers concentrates on what transpired and what it generated, not on why the divine permitted it. The arrival from Mount Hermon establishes a separation in holy history. Prior to this instant, the earth experienced less corruption. Following this instant, wickedness established roots in fresh and dreadful forms. The Watchers carried heaven downward to earth, yet they carried it downward in distorted, perverted manners. They carried understanding that ought to have stayed concealed. They formed entities that ought never to have existed. They demolished the arrangement that maintained creation operating appropriately. This represented the reality Enoch recognized. This represented the emergency he observed. This represented the corruption he would provide testimony opposing. The emergence of the Watchers established the foundation for everything that arrived afterward in his narrative. Their uprising formed the requirement for an observer, a recorder, a prophet who could stand separating heaven and earth and announce the reality. Enoch transformed into that observer. However, initially, he needed to comprehend what the Watchers had accomplished and what ramifications their behaviors would carry. The contamination of the earth. The Watchers failed to merely select human wives and establish settlements. Their existence on earth released a sequence of corruption. The Book of the Watchers documents their violations in precision. Each commander within the corrupted angels instructed particular prohibited understanding, each offering poisoned humanity through different manners. Azazel, among the primary commanders, instructed metalwork. He revealed to humans the method to remove ore from the earth and shape it into implements. This might appear advantageous. Metalworking progressed society. However, Azazel concentrated on particular uses. He instructed the creation of swords, knives, shields, and protective armor. He provided humanity the equipment of warfare. Prior to the Watchers arriving, battles might have concerned stones and wooden clubs. Following Azazel's instruction, humans could manufacture weapons created purely for terminating life. Yet Azazel's corruption reached further. He instructed cosmetics and beautification. He revealed to women the method to improve their looks with eye coloring and pigmented dyes. He disclosed the craft of valuable stones and adornment. These instructions might appear insignificant compared to weapons. The passage regards them as similarly corrupting. For what reason? Since they brought vanity. They formed craving for looks above essence. They instructed humanity to mislead through attractiveness, to appreciate surface above depth. Seamyaza instructed enchantments and the division of roots. This understanding addressed magic and witchcraft. He disclosed the method to control spiritual powers, the method to form spells, the method to secure and dominate through supernatural methods. This instruction broke the appropriate connection between humanity and the spiritual dimension. Humans were intended to reach toward the sacred through prayer and righteousness. Seamyaza presented shortcuts, manipulations, methods to force spiritual powers instead of yield to sacred arrangement. Amaros instructed the dissolving of enchantments, essentially counter-magic. Barakiel instructed astrology, the interpretation of signs throughout the stars. Kokabiel instructed signs and omens. Ezekiel instructed understanding of the clouds. Shamsiel instructed the signs of the earth. Sariel instructed the signs of the sun. Turiel instructed the path of the moon. Each angel focused on a separate area of prohibited understanding. The astrological instructions demand particular consideration. The Astronomical Book of Enoch highlights that the Watchers instructed a contaminated astronomy. They disclosed the method to interpret destiny throughout the stars, the method to forecast through celestial patterns, the method to trust that human fate got inscribed throughout the heavens. This opposed sacred purpose. The divine alone established human destiny. The stars were illuminations and indicators for seasons, nothing beyond. Instructing humans to venerate or depend on the stars, to regard them as governing powers, guided individuals away from the genuine divine. Warfare equipment, magic, astrology, witchcraft. These instructions possessed a shared thread. They provided humans might that contaminated them. They supplied understanding that resulted in arrogance and brutality. They disclosed mysteries that ought to have stayed concealed. The Watchers presented prohibited fruit, and humanity consumed enthusiastically. The ramifications appeared rapidly. Brutality expanded across the earth. With superior weapons arrived more fatal battles. With magical understanding arrived efforts to control and dominate. With astrology arrived fatalism and the rejection of ethical accountability. The instructions of the Watchers poisoned each component of human civilization. However, the greatest corruption originated from the children of the Watchers and human women. The Book of the Watchers identifies them as Nephilim, although additional writings employ different designations. Giants, corrupted ones, mighty individuals. These entities were combinations, part angel and part human. They held the power of their angelic fathers and the bodily form to function throughout the physical reality. The Nephilim developed to massive proportion. Ancient traditions portrayed them as rising above typical humans. The Book of Giants, discovered in portions at Qumran, supplies greater precision. The giants Oya and Hahia stood thousands of cubits in height, following certain additions. Whether actual or symbolic, the focus on proportion signifies their abnormal might and their distinction from typical humanity. These giants held desires, matching their proportion. They devoured enormous amounts of food. The Book of the Watchers declares they consumed the harvest of all the individuals until humans could not longer maintain them. Harvests that nourished families across months vanished into the giants' stomachs. animals disappeared. The giants consumed everything within reach. When typical food disappeared, the giants shifted toward prohibited nourishment. The passage declares they commenced to transgress opposing birds, animals, reptiles, and fish. They devoured these beings in manners that broke natural order. Certain interpretations indicate they consumed them uncooked and living. Additional interpretations indicate the giants devoured blood, which broke sacred commandment even prior to the flood. The evil intensified further. The giants commenced to consume one another. Cannibalism expanded within their number. They battled and eliminated each other, even as they dominated humanity. The brutality transformed universal. The earth filled with blood and transgression. Each inclination of the human heart shifted toward wickedness constantly, as Genesis chapter 6 verifies. The Nephilim signify the ultimate breach of creation arrangement. They ought not to have existed. Their complete existence testified toward the Watcher's violation. Part angel, part human. They belonged toward neither dimension completely. This threshold condition created them hazardous and contaminated. They possessed might-surpassing humans, yet lacked the sacred nature to employ it righteously. They possessed bodily form, yet held something of angelic power. The corruption reached beyond brutality. The passage highlights that humanity acquired evil from the Watchers and their children. Individuals embraced the principles and behaviors of the corrupted angels. They chased might through prohibited methods. They pursued understanding that contaminated instead of enlightened. They rejected righteousness in support of instant satisfaction. The earth itself commenced to call outward. This particular detail shows up repeatedly throughout the Book of the Watchers. The soil that absorbed the blood of the blameless, the territory that observed the brutality, the creation that experienced beneath the giant's footsteps, all of this transmitted upward, a call toward heaven. The earth transformed into an observer opposing the Watchers. Nature itself objected to the abnormal entities that violated it. Women who carried the Nephilim experienced terribly. The passage portrays their suffering. They carried children who developed to impossible proportion. They delivered entities who would terrorize humanity. The Watchers had broken these women, employed them for their personal cravings, and abandoned them to carry the ramifications. The women's anguish joined the earth's call, ascending toward the gates of heaven. The spirits of those eliminated by the Nephilim similarly called outward. Unlike the righteous deceased who slept in tranquility, those eliminated by brutality discovered no slumber. Their spirits demanded justice. They insisted that heaven answer to what was transpiring on earth. The gathering of blameless blood formed a declaration that could not be disregarded. This comprehensive corruption achieved what the Watchers had begun. Their arrival resulted in prohibited instruction. Their instruction resulted in brutality and witchcraft. Their children carried bodily elimination. The ethical, spiritual, and bodily aspects of creation all experienced contamination. Nothing stayed untouched by the Watchers' wrongdoing. The Book of the Watchers highlights that this corruption posed a threat to eliminate humanity completely. If permitted, unchecked, the giants would have devoured everything. If permitted to advance, the prohibited understanding would have guided each human toward error. If allowed to continue, the brutality would have terminated all existence. The emergency required answer. The circumstance demanded involvement. The contamination of the earth established the foundation for judgment. However, prior to judgment could descend, heaven required an observer, someone who could record what had transpired. Someone who could provide testimony, opposing the Watchers and their deeds. The call of the earth and the summons of Enoch. The corruption achieved a limit. The calls climbing toward heaven transformed too countless to disregard. The earth saturated in blameless blood required justice. The spirits of the eliminated called outward from their resting locations. Even the four great archangels perceived these calls as they executed their responsibilities, observing humanity. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. These four stood prior to the divine throne as primary servants of the sacred purpose. Their designations disclose their purposes. Michael signifies who is similar to the divine and functions as the warrior and guardian. Gabriel signifies the divine is my power and functions as the messenger. Raphael signifies the divine heals and functions as the healer and protector. Uriel signifies the divine is my illumination and functions as the illuminator of reality. These four observed what occurred on earth. They witnessed the watchers arriving. They observed the prohibited instructions expanding. They watched the Nephilim devouring and eliminating. They perceived the calls ascending like vapor from 1,000 flames. Following the Book of the Watchers, they carried the situation prior to the throne of the Most Elevated. Their account detailed the violations. Azazel had instructed metalwork and warfare. The earth drowned in brutality due to weapons he disclosed. Seamyaza had guided the arrival and instructed witchcraft. The Watchers had broken human women and generated children that ought never to have existed. The Nephilim eliminated the earth's resources and terrorized humanity. Prohibited understanding had expanded like poison throughout each nation. The Archangels displayed beyond facts. They displayed the calls. The passage portrays them declaring, "You witness what Azazel has accomplished, the method he has instructed all unrighteousness on earth, and disclosed the eternal mysteries which were maintained in heaven." They reported that Seamyaza had instructed enchantments. They clarified how the Watchers' behaviors had resulted in widespread corruption. They carried heaven's focus toward earth's emergency. The divine's answer arrived immediately. The Most Elevated dispatched each of the four archangels with particular assignments. Uriel obtained instructions to alert Noah regarding the approaching flood. Raphael obtained instructions to secure Azazel hand and foot and throw him into darkness. Michael obtained instructions to secure Seamyaza and the additional Watchers. Gabriel obtained instructions to eliminate the Nephilim by shifting them opposing each other. However, prior to these judgments could be carried out, heaven demanded something additional. An observer, a recorder, someone who could record the violations and provide the verdict. The sacred court required a human voice to provide testimony opposing the Watchers. Angels could carry out judgment, yet a human ought to announce it. The Watchers had committed transgressions against all of humanity. It was fitting that a human being should face them and declare their judgment. This calling fell upon Enoch. The written account doesn't elaborate extensively on the reasons for his selection. Part of the explanation lies in his righteousness. Genesis tells us that he walked alongside God. The Book of the Watchers expands upon this basic truth. Enoch remained separate from the widespread corruption surrounding him. He never absorbed the forbidden knowledge that had been taught. He took no part in the acts of violence. His integrity stayed intact, even as the world around him descended deeper into evil. There may have been importance in his position as the seventh descendant from Adam. In biblical number symbolism, 7 signifies both completion and perfection. Being the 7th generation, Enoch represented a full cycle coming to its end. He occupied a place where one age was closing and another was beginning. Before his deeds proved his righteousness, his place in the family line already marked him as someone set apart. The account describes how Enoch first received his commission. The archangels came to him in person. They made known to him everything that had transpired with the Watchers. They laid out the judgment that was approaching. They informed him that he had been selected to function as the scribe of heaven, the one who would record divine pronouncements, the voice destined to speak words of condemnation to the angels who had fallen. The way Enoch responded revealed the nature of his character. He didn't decline the task. He raised no questions about whether he was worthy. He made no request to be excused from such a fearsome assignment. He simply accepted what was being asked of him. This acceptance creates a parallel with other figures in Scripture who were given dangerous assignments. Think of Moses standing before Pharaoh. Jeremiah confronting the kings, Ezekiel speaking to the exiles. Enoch took his place in the succession of those who proclaimed divine truth without counting the personal cost. The account stresses that Enoch was brought up into heaven before he was dispatched to confront the Watchers. He didn't approach them simply as a righteous human being. He went to them as someone who had stood within the divine council itself. He went as one who had witnessed the throne room firsthand. He went carrying authority that had been granted to him directly from the Most High. This shift from righteous human to heavenly messenger marks the initial stage of Enoch's movement beyond ordinary human limits. His assignment was clear and specific. He was to travel to where the Watchers were and declare to them their coming doom. He was to create a record of their offenses. He was to put the verdict in writing. He was to function as the human witness that the divine court needed. What he spoke would become the lasting record of both the crimes the Watchers had committed and the penalties they would suffer. The cry rising from the earth received its response in the calling of Enoch. The corruption that demanded an answer got one through a witness who remained righteous. The violence calling out for justice would receive its answer through judgment. But before that could happen, the judgment needed to be announced. The Watchers needed to hear what had been decided. The crimes needed to be documented in writing. The testimony needed to be delivered. This particular moment represents Enoch's transformation from a righteous man into a figure of cosmic significance. Prior to this calling, what made him exceptional was his faithfulness. Following this calling, he became something beyond that, functioning as a connection between heaven and earth, a voice speaking on behalf of the divine to those who had fallen, a scribe recording truth that would outlast even the flood. The earth sent up its cry, and heaven responded by listening. Enoch provided the answer. Everything was now in place for a confrontation between the righteous witness and those who had brought corruption to all living creatures. The verdict had already been reached. What remained was for it to be proclaimed. The fallen angels, who had come down from Mount Hermon, were about to learn what their destiny would be from the lips of a man who walked in fellowship with God. The first journey, the confrontation with the Watchers. Enoch made his way to the location where the Watchers had gathered. The text portrays them assembled together, filled with mourning and fear. These beings who had made their descent with such boldness, who had sworn their oath with such resolve, were now trembling. They could sense that something had shifted in the cosmic order. They felt the weight of divine attention now focusing upon them. They understood that judgment was drawing near. The moment Enoch appeared, the Watchers knew who he was. His reputation preceded him. They grasped that he walked with God in ways they themselves had forsaken. When they looked at him, they saw what they had lost, that connection to the divine, that righteousness, that favor with the Most High. His very presence among them bore witness to how far they had fallen, more powerfully than any words possibly could. The Book of the Watchers preserves this scene with careful detail. The fallen angels sat gathered together in Ubel, a place whose name carries the meaning God has rejected. The geography itself reinforces the theological reality. They occupied a location whose very name announced their condition. They made their dwelling in rejection, distant from those heavenly courts they used to frequent. Enoch positioned himself before them and started speaking. The words he spoke were not his own. He spoke in his capacity as heaven's messenger. The text drives this point home repeatedly. These were not judgments that Enoch had formed or opinions he personally held. These were verdicts from the divine realm being delivered through a human mouth. Enoch functioned as the channel by which heaven's decision reached those who had fallen. What he communicated left no room for misunderstanding. The Watchers were going to be bound. They were going to be thrown into darkness. They would stay imprisoned there until the day when final judgment arrived. Their children, the Nephilim, were going to be destroyed. They would be forced to watch as their offspring turned on one another and died. The forbidden teachings they had spread would be erased from the earth. All that they had constructed would be demolished. Not one thing they had achieved would last. The harshness of the judgment was proportional to the severity of what they had done. The Watchers hadn't merely committed sins, they had brought corruption to the entire order of creation. They had crossed the boundary that separated heaven from earth. They had brought into being creatures that posed a threat to humanity's very existence. They had taught knowledge that resulted in wickedness becoming universal. The punishment they would receive matched the violation they had committed. For Enoch to deliver this message took tremendous courage. He stood by himself in the presence of 200 powerful angels. These were beings capable of destroying him physically with minimal effort. They possessed knowledge and power that went far beyond anything human. Yet he spoke without any hesitation, without diluting the verdict in any way, without giving them false hope. His righteousness gave him the boldness to speak. His divine commission gave him the authority to do so. The response from the Watchers made their spiritual condition clear. Rather than showing repentance, they requested that Enoch compose a petition on their behalf. They wanted him to take a plea for mercy back to heaven. They couldn't approach the divine throne by themselves. They needed someone to intercede for them. They needed someone who still possessed the access to that presence they had given up. This request showed that they grasped their situation. They knew they couldn't just go back to heaven. They knew they had broken their connection to the divine court. They recognized that judgment had been announced. Even so, they held on to hope for mercy. They wanted Enoch to present their case, to bring their repentance forward, to request forgiveness. Enoch agreed to write out their petition. This detail carries weight. He didn't refuse them, even though he already knew what the answer would be. He extended mercy to them even while delivering their doom. He treated them with a dignity they hadn't shown toward humanity. He served as their scribe, despite their condemnation. The text describes Enoch taking his seat beside the waters of Dan, located south of Hermon to the west. He composed the petition. He put their plea for mercy into writing. He created a document containing their request for forgiveness. Then he read the petition out loud until sleep overtook him. The specific mention of him falling asleep serves to introduce what comes next, a vision that would provide the definitive answer to the petition. In the vision that followed, clouds and mist enveloped Enoch. He moved through them, carried along by winds and stars. He traveled with great speed through the air, drawing closer to the heavenly palace. The architecture of heaven revealed itself before his eyes. Walls made of crystal, floors consisting of snow and ice, tongues of fire between the stones. A structure larger than any earthly building, with ceilings resembling the path of stars and lightning. Within the greater structure stood yet another structure, even more magnificent. Its floor consisted of fire. Its foundation was fire. Its upper section was lightning and the path of stars. Its roof blazed with flames. Cherubim surrounded it on all sides. The glory radiating from it generated such intense heat that Enoch found he couldn't look at it straight on. A magnificent throne sat inside, looking like crystal in appearance, its wheels resembling the shining sun. From underneath the throne, streams of blazing fire poured forth. Enoch couldn't look at it directly. The great glory sat upon the throne. Even divine beings found themselves unable to look upon this presence. No angel could enter this space. No created being could come close. A ring of fire encircled the throne, preventing access. 10,000 times 10,000 stood in attendance before it. Yet none of them approached closely. The voice speaking from the throne addressed Enoch. It spoke to him directly, calling him to come forward. Though angels couldn't approach, Enoch received a summons. Though fire encircled the throne, Enoch was called to pass through it. The vision made clear his unique position. He had been granted access that even unfallen angels didn't possess. His righteousness gave him clearance to stand in the very presence of the Most High. The divine voice spoke regarding the petition Enoch had composed. The response came with no hesitation and offered no mercy for the Watchers. Forgiveness would not be granted to them. They had known better. They had fully understood the cosmic order. They had violated it by choice. They had sworn an oath to carry out their crime. They were going to face the consequences that resulted from their choices. The text preserves the specific words of condemnation. The watchers would be forced to witness their children, the Nephilim, being destroyed. They would watch the destruction of everything they cared about. They would remain bound in darkness, powerless to intercede, powerless to take action, powerless to do anything except endure the knowledge of what they had caused. This punishment would continue until the great day of judgment arrived, when their ultimate fate would be sealed. Heaven sent Enoch back, carrying this response. He returned to Ubel, to that place of divine rejection where the watchers were waiting. He stood before them once more and communicated the answer to their petition. The text captures how they reacted. Terror seized them, trembling took hold of them. They fell with their faces to the ground before Enoch. Their terror is understandable. They had been hoping for mercy. They had believed that repentance might alter their fate. They had thought their petition might touch the divine heart. Instead, what they received was absolute condemnation. The door they hoped might still be open had been sealed shut. The grace they were seeking was denied to them. The forgiveness they had requested turned out to be impossible. Enoch's function in this confrontation reveals the theology that underlies the entire narrative. Heaven insisted on having a human witness testify against the watchers. The crime had been committed against humanity. A human voice needed to pronounce their doom. Angels had the power to bind them and cast them down, but it took a man to tell them the reasons why. Enoch became that voice. His willingness to compose their petition, even with the knowledge that it would be rejected, demonstrates his character. He gave them what dignity they had left. He treated them as beings deserving of a hearing, despite the fact that their judgment was already sealed. He demonstrated the very righteousness that had earned him this commission in the first place. The confrontation at Ubel marks a pivotal moment. The watchers had completed their fall. The judgment had been declared. The witness had given testimony. Now the sentence was going to be carried out. Raphael would proceed to bind Azazel. Michael would chain Seamyaza and his companions. Gabriel would turn the Nephilim against each other. The corruption was going to be cleansed. But before the judgment fell in its entirety, Enoch would be shown additional things. His journey was only in its beginning stages. The confrontation with the Watchers had been his first assignment. Heaven had more things to reveal. The cosmos held secrets that required recording. Enoch, the witness, was going to become Enoch the explorer. Enoch, the student of divine mysteries. Enoch, the keeper of heavenly knowledge. The Watchers stayed in their place of rejection, awaiting the binding that was coming. Enoch departed, having completed his first commission. He had stood in the presence of the fallen. He had announced their doom to them. He had shown that righteousness could give a human being authority even over angels who had chosen rebellion. His first journey had established his role. The journeys that would follow would expand his knowledge until he became the master of all mysteries existing between heaven and earth. The cosmic tour, revelations about the universe. Following his confrontation with the Watchers, Enoch's education went deeper. The Archangels took on the role of guides through creation. They revealed to him the hidden architecture underlying reality. They showed him the storehouses where natural forces made their dwelling. They explained the structure holding the universe in place. What started as an assignment to condemn the fallen grew into a complete tour of everything that exists. Uriel took Enoch first to the western regions. In that place he witnessed the great river that flowed beyond the world where people lived. Mountains rose in that direction, their slopes covered with precious stones. Pearls, antimony, and jasper dotted the peaks. The stones radiated light from within. These weren't ordinary minerals. They had qualities that earthly gems could only faintly mirror. The angel provided explanations for each mountain's significance. One peak served as the location for the throne of God whenever the Lord came down to visit earth, bringing blessing. Another was designated as the site where judgment would take place. A third contained the tree whose fruit would provide nourishment for the righteous following the final restoration. Every feature of the landscape held theological meaning. Geography and cosmology merged together into a unified vision of divine purpose. Enoch traveled next to the center of the earth. There he saw the blessed tree, the tree that would remain untouched until the great judgment arrived. Its fragrance surpassed that of all spices. Its leaves and blossoms would never wither. Its fruit possessed the power to heal and grant life. This tree, revealed to Enoch in vision, stood for the restoration that would follow judgment. Where the watchers had brought corruption, God would bring renewal. The tour moved on to the ends of the earth. Enoch saw the places where heaven and earth came together. Massive gates stood in those locations, one gate for each wind. The winds emerged through these gates to blow across the world. 12 openings faced various directions. Some winds brought blessing when they blew, others brought destruction. The winds followed precise orders. They came forth according to divine command and returned when their assigned work was finished. Past the gates of the winds, Enoch witnessed the storehouses containing other natural forces. Lightning made its dwelling in one chamber, thunder in another. Hail waited in the place appointed for it. Snow rested in frozen storehouses. Frost gathered in chambers made of crystal. Rain accumulated behind doors that were sealed. Every weather phenomenon, every natural force that made contact with the earth, resided in its own designated dwelling place until it was summoned forth. The organization made divine order visible. Nothing occurred through chaos or random chance. The universe functioned according to precise laws and structures. What human beings experienced as random weather actually resulted from angels opening and closing particular storehouses. What appeared to be natural processes actually involved conscious decisions made by spiritual beings who followed divine instructions. Uriel brought Enoch to the prison where stars were held. Certain stars had violated the commands that had been given to them. They had come forth from their gates at incorrect times or traveled along wrong paths. Because of this disobedience, they were bound in a place of punishment. They would remain confined there for 10,000 ages, suffering because they failed to follow the courses that had been appointed to them. This imprisonment of rebellious stars created a parallel with the imprisonment of the Watchers. Just as angels had the capacity to rebel, so did celestial bodies. The cosmos operated under law. Everything from the highest angel down to the smallest star owed obedience to the Creator. Transgression at any level resulted in judgment. Order was universal throughout creation. Rebellion received punishment wherever it took place. The tour continued on to the place of luminaries. Enoch observed how the sun and moon traveled on their paths. He saw their gates, their routes, their precise movements. The Astronomical Book of Enoch, encompassing chapters 72 through 82, preserves these observations in technical detail. The text lays out a solar calendar consisting of 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of 13 weeks apiece. This calendar stood in contradiction to the lunar calendar that some communities were using. The significance of this astronomical knowledge becomes apparent in context. The Watchers had taught astronomy in a corrupted form. They had revealed how to read fate in the patterns of stars, how to engage in astrology, how to believe that the heavenly bodies controlled human destiny. Enoch received the true astronomy. The stars moved according to laws that were fixed. They marked times and seasons. They provided light to the world. They didn't determine fate. They didn't control human choices. They were servants of the Creator, not gods deserving worship or forces to be feared. Enoch witnessed the portals through which the sun came forth. 12 gates existed in total, 6 positioned in the east and 6 in the west. The sun traveled through different gates at different times throughout the year, and this created the changing seasons. The text supplies exact measurements. This particular gate produces this particular amount of daylight. That particular gate creates this particular length of night. Everything operated with mathematical precision. The moon's journey received treatment with equal detail. Enoch learned how the moon went through its phases of waxing and waning. He saw that its light came from the sun. He grasped the cycles that governed how it appeared. This knowledge worked against superstitions about the moon. It had no power of its own. It reflected the light coming from the sun. Its phases followed patterns that could be predicted. It was a keeper of time, not a deity. Beyond these astronomical features, Enoch saw where the dead made their dwelling. The spirits of departed human beings didn't wander without purpose. They resided in particular chambers, separated according to the lives they had lived on earth. The righteous made their dwelling in pleasant locations with access to a spring of water. The wicked suffered in regions of darkness. Those who had not received justice for their deaths cried out without ceasing for vindication. Each category of the dead occupied the space appointed to them. This vision of the afterlife brought theological clarity. Death didn't bring an end to consciousness. The spirits of human beings continued to exist. They awaited the final judgment in places that suited the choices they had made during earthly life. The righteous rested in conditions of peace. The wicked endured torment. Those who had been destroyed unjustly maintained their cry for vindication. The moral structure governing the universe extended past death. Enoch witnessed the tree of wisdom from which Adam and Eve had eaten. It stood in the east, its height reaching toward heaven. Its fruit imparted knowledge of good and evil. The angel explained that death entered the world by means of this tree. The choice to eat from it brought mortality upon humanity. Yet the tree itself wasn't evil in nature. The prohibition against eating was meant as a test. Violation of that test produced consequences. The geography Enoch explored extended all the way to the edges of creation. He saw the great abyss where waters churned in darkness. He witnessed the foundations of the earth, the pillars on which the world was resting. He observed the corners of the earth where different regions came together. He learned about the 4 quarters and how they related to the calendar and the seasons. 7 mountains appeared in his vision, arranged from east to west. The middle mountain rose to the greatest height, like a throne. Its summit made contact with heaven. Precious stones covered it entirely. The entire mountain gleamed like the throne of God. This peak was going to be the seat of the Holy One. When the final judgment came to pass, the geography of Earth contained markers pointing toward eschatological events. Rivers of fire flowed in certain regions. They burned for eternity, never consuming their fuel, never growing less. Enoch saw these rivers and understood they represented the punishment awaiting those who were wicked. The fire wasn't metaphorical in nature. It existed as an actual feature of the cosmos, prepared to receive those who rejected righteousness. Paradise appeared in the northeast. 7 mountains of precious stones surrounded it on all sides. Trees of fragrant wood grew there in perfect order. Among them stood the tree of life, whose scent surpassed all others. This garden, distinct from Eden yet similar in character, awaited the righteous. After judgment, the holy would receive this place as their inheritance. They would eat from the tree of life, and their lives would continue forever. All throughout the journey, angels explained what Enoch was witnessing. They named each feature. They described what purpose it served. They connected physical geography to spiritual truth. The universe Enoch explored was not neutral territory. Every mountain, every storehouse, every gate testified to divine wisdom and power. Creation itself was a vast temple, organized according to sacred principles. The cosmic tour brought transformation to Enoch's understanding. Before these journeys, he knew God through daily walking with the divine. After these journeys, he knew the structure of everything God had made. He understood how creation functioned. He saw the mechanisms behind natural phenomena. He learned the geography of both judgment and blessing. He became the human being who knew the universe the way angels knew it. This knowledge served a specific purpose. Enoch would make a record of what he learned. He would compose books containing these revelations. Generations to come would read his accounts and understand that the universe operated according to divine law. They would know that judgment had been prepared. They would recognize that righteousness led to rest in pleasant places, while wickedness led to torment. They would learn the true astronomy that stood against the corrupted teachings of the Watchers. The tour reached its conclusion with Enoch returning from his journeys, possessing complete knowledge of creation's secrets. He had seen what lay beyond the reach of human sight. He had traveled to places where humans couldn't go. He had learned what angels knew. This wisdom made him more than a prophet. It made him heaven's scribe, the keeper of mysteries, the human being who bridged the gap between earthly limitation and divine knowledge. The Messiah and the Son of Man. The Book of Parables, comprising chapters 37 through 71 of 1st Enoch, presents Enoch's most profound visions. These chapters, likely composed in the 1st century before the Common Era, though some scholars debate the dating, describe the final judgment in vivid detail. At the center of these visions stands a mysterious figure called the Son of Man, the Chosen One, the Anointed One. Enoch saw this figure in heaven before the judgment had begun. The Son of Man possessed a face full of grace, resembling one of the holy angels. He stood in the presence of the Ancient of Days, the one whose garment was white as snow and whose hair resembled pure wool. This scene creates an echo of the vision recorded in Daniel 7, where one like a son of man comes with the clouds of heaven and approaches the Ancient of Days. The text describes the Son of Man as having been chosen before the creation of the world took place. This pre-existence sets him apart from ordinary humans or prophets. He existed in heaven before time had begun. God selected him for his role before the foundation of the earth was laid. His wisdom flowed from the source of divine wisdom itself. His righteousness came directly from the Ancient of Days. This figure was going to sit on a throne of glory. The text emphasizes this point repeatedly. A throne awaited the Son of Man. He would carry out judgment from this throne. Kings and rulers would be thrown down from their thrones, while this righteous one ascended to his. The reversal of earthly power structures was complete. Those who had oppressed the righteous would face the one they had rejected. The Son of Man's authority extended over all judgment. He would judge both angels and humans. He would separate the righteous from the wicked. His word would determine final destiny. The text states that wisdom poured out before him like water. Righteousness flowed from his presence. He possessed complete knowledge of all secret things. Nothing could be hidden from his penetrating gaze. Enoch witnessed the judgment scene in vision. The righteous and holy stood before the Son of Man. They had been hidden from the wicked during their earthly lives, but now they appeared in glory. The text emphasizes that the righteous suffered on earth but would rejoice in heaven. Their vindication was certain. Their reward was prepared. The kings and mighty ones who had oppressed the righteous faced terror. When they saw the Son of Man sitting on his throne of glory, they recognized him. Some interpreters suggest they recognized him as one they had rejected during earthly life. Others argue they simply recognized his authority in that moment. Either way, their reaction was uniform. Fear and anguish seized them. These earthly rulers begged for mercy. They asked for time to worship the Lord of Spirits. They wanted opportunity to confess and turn from their sins. But the time for repentance had passed. The judgment was now. Their lives on earth had been their opportunity. They had spent that time oppressing the righteous, pursuing their own glory, ignoring the divine will. Now they were reaping what they had sown. The text describes the kings being driven from the presence of the Son of Man. They wouldn't be destroyed immediately. Instead, they would be handed over to angels of punishment. These angels would carry out the sentence. The wicked would face torment. They would suffer in proportion to their crimes. They would endure the consequences of their rejection of righteousness. The Son of Man's relationship to the righteous stands in sharp contrast with his role toward the wicked. For the holy ones he was a light, a hope, a joy. The text states that he would eat with them. He would make his dwelling among them. They would wear garments of glory that would never wear out. They would live in his presence for all time. Their lives would be without end. This fellowship between the Son of Man and the righteous represents the ultimate restoration. What was lost in Eden would be regained. Humanity would once again walk with God. The separation caused by sin would come to an end. Death would be swallowed up. Sorrow would cease. The righteous would inherit the earth renewed and live forever in peace. The identification of this Son of Man figure has generated extensive discussion. The text itself makes a remarkable claim in chapter 71. There, Enoch is told that he himself is the Son of Man. The angel says to him that he is the Son of Man who was born for righteousness. This statement has puzzled interpreters for centuries. Some scholars argue this represents Enoch's transformation into an angelic being. He becomes the Son of Man through his righteousness and his ascension. Others suggest the text underwent editing, and this identification was added later. Still others maintain that Enoch serves as a type or pattern of the Son of Man, rather than being identical to him. The influence of these passages on later Jewish and Christian thought appears significant, though the exact relationship remains debated among scholars. The Gospels present Jesus using the title Son of Man for himself repeatedly. He refers to the Son of Man coming on the clouds, sitting on a throne, judging the nations. These images echo the Book of Parables closely. Whether the New Testament authors knew first Enoch directly, and whether the parables section predates or postdates the Gospels, remains a matter of scholarly discussion without firm consensus. The pre-existence of the Son of Man particularly resonated with early Christian theology. The idea that the Messiah existed before creation, that he was chosen and prepared from eternity, that he would sit on a divine throne and exercise universal judgment, these concepts appear in developed form in the Book of Parables. If this section predates Christianity, it suggests Jewish apocalyptic thought was already developing an exalted understanding of the coming deliverer. If it postdates Christianity, it may represent a response to or parallel development with Christian claims. The dating uncertainty means both possibilities remain open to scholarly consideration. The Book of Parables presents 3 parables or extended visions. Each develops different aspects of the final judgment and the Son of Man's role. The first parable describes the dwelling places of the righteous and the punishment of the wicked. The second parable focuses on the judgment of the watchers and the vindication of the chosen one. The third parable depicts the exaltation of the Son of Man and the transformation of the earth. Throughout these visions, Enoch serves as both witness and participant. He sees the judgment, he records what will happen, but he also experiences transformation. The line between Enoch the observer and Enoch the observed blurs. He watches the Son of Man's triumph while also being told he is that Son of Man. This dual identity suggests the text understands Enoch as representative of all the righteous who will be exalted. The Lord of Spirits, a title used throughout the Book of Parables for God, chose the Son of Man before the world had begun. This choice was not arbitrary. It reflected divine purpose and plan. The Son of Man embodied what God intended for humanity from creation. He represented the perfection that Adam lost. He would restore what the watchers corrupted. The wisdom dwelling in the Son of Man came from drinking at the fountain of divine wisdom. He possessed all understanding. He knew all secrets. He comprehended all mysteries. This complete knowledge made him fit to judge. No one could deceive him. No hidden crime could escape his notice. No false excuse could fool him. His judgment would be absolutely just because his knowledge was absolutely complete. Enoch's visions of the Son of Man thus provide a theological framework for understanding the final judgment. God would not destroy the wicked arbitrarily. The Son of Man would execute perfect justice. The righteous would receive vindication. The oppressors would face the one they oppressed. The cosmic order violated by the Watchers would be restored. A new age would dawn in which righteousness dwelt on earth permanently. These visions transformed how communities understood their suffering. If the Son of Man was real, if his throne awaited him, if judgment was certain, then present oppression was temporary. The wicked might triumph for a time, but their time was short. The righteous might suffer now, but their reward was eternal. This hope sustained communities facing persecution and violence. It gave meaning to their faithfulness. It promised that their loyalty to righteousness would be honored when the Son of Man appeared on his throne of glory. The celestial scribe, the astronomical book. The astronomical book, comprising chapters 72 through 82 of 1st Enoch, represents the oldest section of the Enochian corpus. According to scholarly analysis, fragments discovered at Qumran date to the 3rd century before the Common Era. This text reveals Enoch's knowledge of the heavenly bodies and their movements. More than simple astronomy, it presents a theology of time and a counter to the corrupted calendar teachings of the Watchers. Uriel, whose name carries the meaning "God is my light," served as Enoch's guide through these revelations. The angel showed him the laws governing the heavens, the paths followed by the luminaries, the gates through which they traveled. Nothing about the movement of sun, moon, and stars happened randomly. Everything followed precise divine command. The text begins its focus with the sun. 12 gates exist in the firmament of heaven, gates through which the sun emerges. 6 gates face east. 6 gates face west. The sun rises through one of the eastern gates and sets through the corresponding western gate. Different gates produce different lengths of day and night. The sun's journey through these gates creates the changing seasons. During the spring equinox, the sun rises through the 4th gate in the east. Day and night divide equally. This marks the beginning of the year, according to the calendar Enoch received. From this point forward, the sun moves progressively through other gates, creating longer days as summer draws near. At the summer solstice, the sun uses the 6th gate, producing the longest day of the year. After the summer solstice, the progression reverses direction. The sun returns through the gates toward the 4th gate, which it reaches at the autumn equinox. Day and night again divide equally. Then the sun continues toward the 1st gate, reaching it at the winter solstice. This creates the shortest day and longest night. From there, the cycle begins anew, moving back toward the 4th gate and the spring equinox. The astronomical book provides specific measurements. When the sun rises through the 4th gate, the day lasts exactly 12 parts, while the night lasts 12 parts. When the sun uses the 6th gate, the day extends to 16 parts, while the night shrinks to 8 parts. When the sun travels through the 1st gate, the day measures only 8 parts, while the night stretches to 16 parts. These proportions govern the rhythm of the year. The moon's movements receive equally detailed treatment. The moon does not generate its own light. It reflects the illumination coming from the sun. Enoch saw this clearly. The moon waxes as it moves toward the sun and wanes as it moves away. This understanding contradicted ancient beliefs that attributed independent power to the moon. The lunar cycle divides into 4 weeks of 7 days apiece. The moon begins as a thin crescent. It grows night by night until it reaches full illumination. Then it decreases night by night until it disappears. The text describes exactly how much of the moon's face shows light each night. On the 1st night, 1/14 of the moon lights up. By the 7th night, 1/2 glows. By the 14th night, the entire face shines. Then the diminishing begins. The astronomical book emphasizes that the moon's cycle does not align perfectly with the solar year. 12 lunar months produce only 354 days. The solar year, according to the text, contains 364 days. This 10 Day difference creates problems for calendars based on lunar cycles. Over time, the seasons drift. Festivals get celebrated at the wrong times. The calendar loses its connection to agricultural realities. Enoch received the true calendar based purely on the sun. 364 days divide perfectly into 52 weeks of 7 days each. The year splits into 4 seasons of exactly 13 weeks. Each season begins on the same day of the week. The calendar possesses complete symmetry and order. Festivals fall on the same dates every year. No confusion arises, no drift occurs. This solar calendar directly opposed the lunar calendar that developed in Judaism after the Babylonian exile. The Book of Jubilees, which draws heavily on Enochic tradition, explicitly condemns those who follow the moon instead of the sun. It declares that following a lunar calendar leads to celebrating festivals at incorrect times, violating the sacred rhythm God established in creation. The controversy extended beyond technical matters. According to the Astronomical book, the Watchers taught corrupted astronomy. They revealed how to read omens in the stars. They showed humans how to practice astrology. They promoted the belief that heavenly bodies controlled human fate. This teaching undermined human responsibility and divine sovereignty simultaneously. The true astronomy Enoch learned contradicted Watcher teachings on every point. The stars were not gods. They did not control destiny. They followed fixed laws set by the Creator. They emerged through assigned gates at appointed times. They served as markers for seasons, days, and years. They provided light. They displayed God's glory, but they determined nothing about human choices or fates. The text lists the names of 12 winds that blow through gates in the firmament. 4 winds hold primary positions at the cardinal directions. 8 winds occupy intermediate positions. Each wind has its assigned gate and its specific character. Some bring blessing, others bring drought, still others bring storms. The winds obey divine command. They appear when called upon and vanish when commanded. Even the celestial bodies that light up the darkness of night operate under exact guidelines. The written record identifies the chiefs of these stars, the leaders of thousands who rule over the rest. 4 principal leaders stand at the forefront of the stellar hierarchies. These maintain the divisions and the changing seasons as divinely instructed. They make certain that every star carries out its designated role. The Book of Astronomy documents Enoch's careful watching of how stars traveled through the darkness above. He took note of which groupings of stars appeared at what hours. He watched as celestial bodies moved in formations. He mastered the designations of the prominent stars and where they stood in relation to one another. This understanding made accurate measurement of time possible even during nighttime hours. The focus throughout continues to be theological in nature. These observations go beyond mere scientific recording. They bear witness to the order established by the divine. They show that all of creation functions under law. They offer proof that the Creator set everything in place with both wisdom and exact precision. The intricate workings of heavenly mechanics point directly to the intelligence that designed them. The written account circles back time and again to matters of the calendar. The year holds 364 days. This figure can be divided equally by 7, by 4, by 13. It creates a structure of perfect symmetry. Any departure from this framework breaks the order that God put in place. Tracking time by the moon brings only disorder and mistakes. Tracking time by the sun keeps everything aligned with what the divine intends. Uriel made clear to Enoch that those who came after would stray from the proper calendar. They would insert or remove days. They would track time by the moon instead of the sun. They would hold sacred celebrations at incorrect moments. This distortion of proper timekeeping ran parallel to the distortion of other forms of knowledge by those fallen angels. Just as the Watchers had taught corrupted astronomy, generations to come would embrace corrupted ways of measuring time. The angel gave warning that corrupting the calendar would bring corruption to worship itself. When communities celebrated Passover at the wrong moment, they broke faith with the remembrance of their deliverance from Egypt. When they marked the Day of Atonement incorrectly, their acts of devotion missed the moment heaven had appointed. The calendar was far more than a small technical concern. It controlled when the people met their God in moments set apart as holy. Enoch was given this knowledge of the heavens so he could keep it safe. He recorded it in written form. He transferred it to his descendants, especially to Methuselah. The understanding would survive through the great flood. Noah would bring it aboard the vessel. The faithful who remained would guard the correct calendar, even as others abandoned it. The Book of Astronomy ends with urgent appeals to observe the calendar that Enoch was given. It declares blessings for those who keep the proper times and seasons. It speaks warnings of judgment for those who corrupt what has been made sacred. What hangs in the balance goes far beyond technical precision. At stake is staying connected to divine order versus sliding into disorder and chaos. The section about the watchers in this body of Enochic writings shaped the Qumran community in powerful ways. The Dead Sea Scrolls held many texts focused on calendar matters. The people there followed a solar calendar of 364 days. They turned away from the lunar calendar that the authorities at the Jerusalem temple were using. This point of disagreement played a part in their splitting off from the wider Jewish community. They viewed themselves as safeguarding the authentic times and seasons that had been shown to Enoch. The theological meaning extends well past calendar questions. The Astronomical book announces that all of creation runs according to unchanging laws set by God. The cosmos does not act on whim. Time itself is not random. The heavens put order and intention on display. This order mirrors the nature of the one who created. To live in harmony with this order is to live in harmony with God himself. To break this order is to rise up against divine wisdom. Enoch, the writer of records, became Enoch, the observer of the heavens. He gained knowledge of heaven's mysteries. He grasped how time itself operated. He was given the authentic calendar. This knowledge elevated him beyond being simply a moral voice, speaking against the fallen angels. It transformed him into the guardian of cosmic understanding, the human being who comprehended how creation functioned, the prophet capable of steering communities towards staying aligned with time as God ordained it. The visions experienced in sleep, from the garden to the end of days. Enoch's prophetic abilities reached beyond, bearing witness to present corruption and coming judgment. He perceived the complete arc of human events from their start to their conclusion. The Book of Dream Visions, covering chapters 83 through 90, relates 2 dreams that Enoch had before he was taken from earth. These dreams employed animal imagery to tell the story of events from the very beginning to the age that is final. The first dream visited Enoch when he was still a young man, before taking a wife. He laid himself down for sleep and underwent a vision that filled him with terror. He saw the sky collapsing in on itself. He witnessed the ground being pulled down into an enormous pit. The vision troubled him so deeply that he awoke and went at once to his grandfather, whose name was Mahalalel. He recounted what had appeared before him and requested help understanding it. Mahalalel grasped what the dream signified. The falling sky and the sinking ground stood for the flood that was approaching. The vision made known that judgment was about to fall upon the world. All things would face destruction, except for a small group of the righteous. This dream gave Enoch preparation for the work that would come later. He understood from his youth that wrongdoing would lead to disaster. He knew that God would not allow corruption to go on without end. The second dream offers far greater detail. Enoch watched the complete course of events throughout history, revealed through symbols. Human beings took the form of animals. Various kinds of animals stood for different peoples and kingdoms. Bulls served as symbols for the ancient fathers of the faith. Sheep stood for those who were righteous. Wild beasts represented the nations outside the covenant. The dream proceeded in order from creation forward through history, all the way to the final reckoning. The vision opened with the act of creation. A white bull came into view, representing the first man, Adam. From this bull came a heifer, representing the first woman, Eve. Next appeared a black calf, standing for Cain, the first to commit murder. After that came a red calf, representing Abel, the victim who died innocent. The colors carried meaning about character. White signified righteousness and purity. Black pointed to wickedness and evil. Red marked the shedding of innocent blood. The account moved rapidly through the genealogies of those early times. Bulls increased in number. Some stayed white, holding to righteousness. Others shifted to black, descending into wrongdoing. The symbolic language let Enoch compress long stretches of time into brief passages while drawing attention to the key moral differences. The fallen angels were shown as stars dropping down from the sky. They came to earth and mixed themselves with cattle, showing their forbidden unions with the daughters of men. These unnatural combinations produced elephants, camels, and donkeys, representing the race of giants called Nephilim. These mixed creatures brought terror to the bulls and cattle. They consumed them. They caused violence to overflow across the world. The animal imagery captured how unnatural the children of the Watchers truly were. Noah was shown as a white bull, born into the midst of all this corruption. The dream revealed him building a large vessel, while waters started to climb higher. The flood arrived, drowning every elephant, camel, and donkey. It wiped out the majority of bulls and cattle as well. Only Noah and those with him lived through it inside the vessel. This kept the white bulls alive through the time of judgment. Following the flood, the dream showed fresh black cattle and bulls making their appearance. Corruption came back, even though the cleansing waters had swept the earth clean. Human nature in its essence had not transformed. The ability to do evil still existed within. This made clear why wickedness continued, even after God had destroyed the generation that was wicked. The story then centered on Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, each one pictured as a white bull. From Jacob came 12 bulls, standing for the 12 tribes. These bulls multiplied and became sheep. The change from bulls to sheep indicated a shift had occurred. The patriarchs had stood as individuals. Their descendants formed a community, a flock that required someone to lead and protect them. The time of slavery in Egypt appeared as the sheep coming under control of wild animals, with wolves representing those who ruled Egypt. The sheep experienced suffering and cried out for help. God listened to their cries and sent a sheep to rescue them. This sheep, Moses, though the dream gives no name explicitly, led the flock away from bondage through water that drowned the wolves who chased after them. The journey through the desert showed sheep walking behind the one who delivered them toward a land of promise, but they turned away again and again to pay homage to foreign things. They lost memory of the one who had saved them. This cycle of disobedience and deliverance played out repeatedly in the dream. God brought forth shepherds to lead the flock. Yet the flock often pushed these shepherds away. The dream gave substantial focus to the era of those who judged Israel and those who ruled as kings. Shepherds guided the sheep, but a great many shepherds fell short of their responsibility. They let wolves tear apart the sheep. They made themselves wealthy rather than keeping the flock safe. They guided the sheep toward wrong paths instead of toward doing right. This failure among those in leadership mirrored the failure among the common people. The splitting of the kingdom was shown as the sheep dividing into two separate groups. The tribes of the north and the tribes of the south went their own ways. Both groups fell into worship of false gods. Both faced consequences for this. The conquest of the northern kingdom by Assyria appeared as wild animals devouring sheep. The conquest of the southern kingdom by Babylon looked much the same. The flock scattered in all directions. The temple lay in ruins. The sheep were carried off to foreign lands. Yet even in captivity, certain sheep remained white. These held fast to righteousness, despite being surrounded by evil. They refused to bow before gods that were not their own. They kept the covenant, even though they were far from the land they knew. These sheep who stayed faithful represented the hope that kept the community alive through their time of exile. The return from Babylon was pictured as sheep coming back together. They reconstructed what had been torn down. They brought back proper worship. But the dream revealed that the sheep stayed at risk. Wolves kept threatening them. The shepherds kept failing in their duties. The time after the exile did not usher in the complete restoration that the prophets had spoken of. The dream then shifted to events happening at the time when it was written. Birds started attacking the sheep. These birds stood for the Greek rulers under Antiochus Epiphanes. The persecution grew more intense. Sheep faced heavy pressure to give up their identity. Many surrendered to this pressure. They became like the very birds that were attacking them. But some sheep refused to yield. They fought back, even though the cost was terrible. This resistance was the Maccabean uprising. The dream showed sheep sprouting horns and battling the birds. Certain sheep with large horns led the fight. They won victories. They pushed the oppressors backward. This detail provides the earliest point after which the dream visions must have been written. The text clearly describes events from the 160s in the time before the Common Era. However, the dream did not conclude with the Maccabean victories. It gazed forward into the age that is final. A white bull made its appearance, standing for the Anointed One, or for Israel made new, or for both at once. Every animal on earth and every bird in the sky came together to bow low before this white bull. The bull had great horns, displaying both power and the right to rule. All the wild animals and birds turned peaceful. They stopped posing any danger to the sheep. This change marked the start of the final age. God came down to the world. The old creation passed out of existence. A new creation came into being. The text describes a new house, greater and more magnificent than any that had ever existed before. Every sheep entered into this house. They turned into white bulls. Even those who had been black underwent transformation into white. Righteousness spread to all. Evil was no more. The judgment of the Watchers took place within this context. The stars that had fallen, those angels who had rebelled, were dragged forward and hurled into a pit of fire. They received their punishment at last. The shepherds who had not done their duty also stood for judgment. They too were cast into the flames. All who had corrupted the flock or brought destruction upon it faced the consequences of their actions. Then the sword was placed into the hands of the sheep. This image has created puzzlement among those who interpret it. Some believe it shows the righteous carrying out judgment on the wicked. Others think it symbolizes the sheep at last, receiving the ability to protect themselves. Still others hold that it demonstrates the transformation of what had been a helpless flock into mighty warriors in the age to come. Enoch observed this entire sweep of history while he slept. Upon waking, tears flowed from him. The vision pressed down on him heavily. He saw what suffering awaited those who would come from him. He witnessed the pattern of failures, followed by restorations happening over and over. He watched evil persist across the generations. Yet he also saw the final victory. He knew that in spite of every struggle, righteousness would win in the end. The format of a dream permitted the text to present material that could cause trouble, but to do so with care. By using animals rather than speaking names of nations openly, the writer could critique those in power without committing outright rebellion. The symbolic code gave protection to the one who wrote while still communicating clearly to those who read and knew the code. Those suffering under Greek oppression saw themselves as the sheep that had grown horns. They understood exactly who the attacking birds were meant to represent. This vision brought hope to communities enduring persecution. History was not moving without direction. God was watching over each stage. Though evil appeared to be winning, those who oppressed others had judgment waiting for them. Though the righteous were suffering, their vindication was approaching. The pattern laid down from the garden forward demonstrated that God always kept a remnant safe. He always brought back what looked like it was lost. He always brought judgment down on those who broke his order. The transformation of every animal into white bulls in the final age showed righteousness becoming universal. Sin would be wiped away, evil would be cleansed out, death itself would come to an end. The curse that began in Eden would be removed. Creation in its entirety would be made new. The long story of struggle and failure would reach its culmination in peace and holiness that would last forever. Through his dream visions, Enoch thus gave a theological structure for making sense of history. The past made sense as getting ready for the present. The sufferings being experienced now had meaning as preparation for glory yet to come. The righteous who had died were waiting for resurrection. The wicked, who appeared to be winning, would face a day of reckoning. Everything was moving toward the moment when God would set up his kingdom for all time. These visions shaped how communities read their sacred writings and understood what they were going through. They saw themselves inside the symbolic story. They identified with the faithful sheep standing against the birds. They placed their hope in the white bull who was coming to transform everything. They held the belief that their suffering had a place in what God was planning. The dream visions showed that Enoch was more than just someone who witnessed the fall of the Watchers. He was a prophet who could see across all of time. His knowledge took in the past, the present, and what was still to come. This vision that covered everything made what he said carry greater weight. He did not speak from the narrow view that humans normally have, but rather from having seen the complete sweep of what God intended to accomplish through history. The continuing influence of the visionary, Enoch, across other traditions. Enoch's impact spread far past the writings directly connected to his name. His figure shows up throughout the religious writings from the Second Temple period of Judaism, in early Christian texts, and even within Islamic tradition. Each community that came across his story reshaped and built upon it to fit their own requirements and theological understandings. The Book of Jubilees, put together in the 2nd century before the Common Era, pays considerable attention to Enoch. This work retells the stories from Genesis and Exodus while inserting extensive interpretive additions. In the account given by Jubilees, Enoch became the very first human being to master the skill of writing. He put down in writing all knowledge, all wisdom, every sign found in the heavens and on the earth. He wrote about the laws governing the seasons and the divisions of the years. Jubilees describes Enoch living in the Garden of Eden following his being taken from earth. He did not ascend to heaven on a permanent basis at first. Rather, God set him in the garden so he could serve as one who bears witness. He would stay there until the day when all faced judgment, at which time he would give testimony against those who had corrupted themselves. This way of portraying him puts emphasis on Enoch's function as witness and keeper of records, rather than simply as a saint receiving reward. The book states that Enoch offered incense that was pleasing to God on a mountain called Kater. This mountain, whose exact location has never been determined, became linked with Enoch's acts of worship. The text stresses that Enoch presented incense in the right way, at the right times, following the right calendar. His worship served as the model for what all worship ought to be, brought into harmony with divine order and the rhythms of the cosmos. Jubilees makes the claim that Enoch wrote a total of 366 books. This number equals the days in the solar year that he made known. The symbolism strengthened the link between Enoch's teaching and correct measurement of time. Though only small portions of this enormous library made it through the ages, the tradition maintained that he had recorded thorough knowledge covering every topic. The Book of Giants, discovered in Aramaic pieces at Qumran, develops further the account of the offspring of the fallen angels. This text centers on how the giants reacted to prophetic dreams, warning them about the flood approaching. Two giants, named Oya and Haya, had troubling visions visit them. They saw a garden filled with trees. A voice spoke out and tore up most of the trees by the roots, leaving behind only 3. The giants had no ability to understand what these dreams meant. They sent out one of their own number, Mahaway, to locate Enoch and ask for interpretation. Mahaway journeyed across the world, searching for the one who was righteous and could see truth. Eventually, he found Enoch and laid the dreams before him. The interpretation that Enoch gave crushed all hope. The garden stood for the earth itself. The trees stood for the giants and for their fathers, the Watchers. The uprooting meant their coming destruction in the waters of the flood. Only 3 would make it through alive, Noah and his 2 sons. This story shows Enoch working as one who interprets prophecy even for the children of the angels who had fallen. His wisdom went beyond all others. Even those marked for destruction knew his authority and came looking for his knowledge. The account emphasizes that judgment did not come without warning. Those who faced condemnation heard what awaited them before it arrived. The Book of Giants left its mark on later Manichaean writings in significant ways. The Manichaeans, a religious movement that began in the 3rd century of the Common Era, wove Enochic materials into their understanding of the cosmos. They adapted the account of the Watchers and the Giants to align with their theology built on dualism. Pieces of their Book of Giants, written in many different languages, show clear dependence on the older Jewish traditions concerning Enoch. 2nd Enoch, kept alive in Old Church Slavonic, gives an account of Enoch's journey to heaven in much more extensive detail than 1st Enoch offers. This text, likely composed in Egypt during the 1st century, reveals the influence of Greek philosophy. It describes Enoch rising up through 7 levels of heaven, encountering angels at every level, and ultimately standing in the presence of God's throne. In the version told by 2nd Enoch, Enoch receives teaching that goes on for 30 days while he remains in heaven. Angels reveal to him the secrets of how things were created, how natural events work, the structure of everything that exists. He gains understanding about the paths that stars follow, the places where snow and hail are kept, the rooms where the winds are stored. He looks upon the tree of life and the tree that brought knowledge. He sees both paradise and the location where punishment happens. More importantly, 2nd Enoch describes a physical change that happens to Enoch. God gives the command to the Archangel Michael to take away Enoch's earthly garments and cover him with sacred oil. Enoch becomes similar to those who are glorious. He takes on the appearance of an angel. His face begins to shine with light. His earthly being transforms into something belonging to heaven. This transformation provides explanation for how Enoch could live in heaven without end. He was no longer merely human in nature. He had become a being of angelic kind. Following 30 days of receiving instruction, God sends Enoch back to earth for a time. He has to teach his children. He has to write down all that he has learned. He has to pass his knowledge along before going back to heaven, where he will stay forever. Enoch comes back and spends 30 days teaching his sons. He writes 366 books. After this, angels carry him back to heaven, and he does not come back again. 3rd Enoch, a Hebrew text composed much later, from the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era, pushes the transformation even further. This work makes Enoch identical with Metatron, who stands as the greatest among all angels. The text describes how Enoch went up to heaven and God changed him completely. His flesh turned into flame, his bones turned into burning coals, his eyes turned into torches, his hair turned into fire. As Metatron, Enoch is given the title of the Lesser, YHWH. He sits upon a throne positioned at the entry to the 7th heaven. Every angel must go past him. He holds authority over every order of angels. He possesses all secrets. He keeps a record of all actions. He works as the scribe of heaven, writing down both the good deeds and the wrongdoing of every person who has ever drawn breath. The material in 3rd Enoch reveals how Jewish mysticism kept developing traditions about Enoch, even after the rabbis who shaped mainstream Judaism pushed the earlier apocalyptic texts to the margins. The rabbis building the Talmud usually stayed away from theorizing about heavenly matters. They kept their focus on law and how to live religious life in practical ways. But circles devoted to mystical experience kept the visions of Enoch alive and expanded them, seeing in him the pattern of the visionary who rises up to look upon divine mysteries. Christian tradition took Enoch in from an early time. The letter of Jude quotes directly from 1 Enoch chapter 1, verse 9, treating it as prophetic scripture with authority. Jude declares, "Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them, saying," Then a passage follows, describing God arriving with tens of thousands of his holy ones to carry out judgment. This direct citation demonstrates that early Christians accepted Enochic material. The letter to the Hebrews places Enoch in its chapter about faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5, states that through faith, Enoch was taken up so that he would not experience death. The text adds that before his being taken up, he received the testimony that he had been pleasing to God. This understanding fits with the Greek translation of the Septuagint for Genesis chapter 5, which uses the Greek word meaning pleased rather than walked with. A number of the early church fathers placed value on Enochic literature. Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, argued for first Enoch's genuineness. He reasoned that Noah kept Enoch's writings safe on the ark. He regarded the book as truly ancient scripture. Clement of Alexandria also made positive reference to Enochic material. But as the Christian biblical canon took shape in the 4th century, the majority of churches left Enochic texts out. Concerns about who wrote them and about their theology resulted in rejection. Only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept 1 Enoch in its canon of scripture. This act of preservation proved essential. Without manuscripts from Ethiopia, the complete text might have disappeared entirely. Islamic tradition knows Enoch by the name Idris. The Quran makes brief mention of him in 2 chapters. Surah Maryam, verses 56 and 57, state and mention in the book Idris, "Indeed he was a man of truth and a prophet, and we raised him to a high station." Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 85, lists him among those who showed patience and righteousness. Later, Islamic tradition built upon these short references. Literature of hadith and commentary identified Idris with Enoch. They described him as the first to put words down with a pen, the first to examine the stars, the first to set laws in place. He taught mathematics and writing to human beings. God lifted him up to the 4th heaven, some traditions say, or to paradise itself, according to others. Islamic scholars held debates about whether Idris lived before Noah or after him. Some positioned him before the Great Flood, keeping to the biblical timeline. Others placed him after Noah, perhaps mixing him up with other prophets. But the connection with Enoch, the one who taught knowledge and writing, the one raised to a high place without experiencing death, stayed consistent across the tradition. The common threads running through these traditions show Enoch's lasting importance. Jewish texts made him the witness speaking against the watchers and the guardian of knowledge about the stars. Christian writers saw in him a prophet who spoke of final judgment ahead of time, and a man of faith who received the reward of being taken from earth. Islamic traditions honored him as a teacher and prophet, lifted up to a position of honor. Each tradition reshaped his story while keeping the essential elements intact. His righteousness, his special understanding, his transformation, or his rising upward. This wide influence shows that communities across many centuries discovered in Enoch a symbol of great power. He stood for the human being who went beyond normal limits through staying faithful. He embodied the possibility of gaining access to wisdom from God. He gave testimony that God gives extraordinary rewards to those who live righteously. His story brought encouragement to believers who faced persecution or were surrounded by corruption. It gave the promise that walking with God brings transformation and being lifted high. The various Enochic texts, though not included in the canon of Scripture in most traditions, kept shaping imagination and theological thinking. They supplied language for talking about angels, demons, final judgment, the structure of the cosmos, and expectations about the Anointed One. They left their mark on art, on literature, on popular religious practice. They put forward a complete way of understanding the world that explained where evil came from, what suffering means, and how righteousness will triumph in the end. The final departure, the reason Enoch was taken. The question that started this exploration requires an answer. 5 verses in Genesis inform us, Enoch walked with God, and God took him. We have looked at the texts that expand on this brief account. We have seen his confrontation with the fallen angels, his travels through the cosmos, his knowledge of the heavens, his prophetic dreams, his influence spreading widely. Now, we can speak directly to why God made the choice to take Enoch without him experiencing death. The answer comes from looking at his story as a whole. Enoch was taken because he carried out multiple essential roles in what God had planned, and he carried them out with perfection. He served as the witness that heaven required to speak against the watchers. He served as the scribe who put down in writing truths that needed to be kept safe. He served as the righteous man whose life showed what it truly meant to walk with God. He served as the prophet who saw from the garden all the way to final judgment. Every one of these roles played a part in his unique fate. First, think about his role as one who bears witness. The Watchers had brought corruption to the earth. Their wrongdoing threatened to destroy humanity in its entirety. The cosmic order that they violated needed a human voice to speak out against them. Angels had the ability to carry out judgment, but a human had to declare it. Enoch stood in that space. He confronted the angels who had fallen. He announced their doom. He wrote their petition and brought back the answer of rejection. He documented their crimes and the punishment they would face. This function of bearing witness called for exceptional character. Enoch could not be touched by the corruption all around him. He had to hold to absolute righteousness while living surrounded by wickedness. He achieved this. The text never assigns any wrongdoing to Enoch. He stands separate from the violence, from the forbidden knowledge, from the moral collapse. His complete integrity made him fit to pass judgment on those who had no integrity whatsoever. But witnessing required more than just character. It required knowledge as well. Enoch had to grasp what the Watchers had done that was wrong. He had to understand the cosmic order that they had broken. This made his education in the secrets of heaven necessary. The Archangels guided him through the universe. They showed him the storehouses, the gates, the chambers, the foundations of everything. They made known to him how creation worked. This knowledge allowed him to testify with authority about what the Watchers had corrupted. Second, look at his role as keeper of records. Heaven had need of truth being written down. The Watchers had taught lies, had corrupted the study of the stars, had spread false magic, had introduced technologies of violence. These lies moved through human communities like sickness spreading. The cure required truth that had been preserved. Enoch wrote down the true calendar. He documented how celestial bodies actually moved. He recorded the structure of all that exists. He described the places where judgment happens and where blessing is found. His books became a library holding divine wisdom. Though the greater part of this library has been lost, what survived shaped communities across centuries. The calendar he made known guided the community at Qumran. The judgment he described brought encouragement to believers facing persecution. The Son of Man that he witnessed shaped expectations about the Anointed One. His writings served purposes reaching far past his own lifetime. The role of scribe provides explanation for why Enoch was taken rather than being allowed to die. Men who have died cannot write. God needed Enoch alive and able to function so he could finish his work of documentation. His being taken from earth removed him from the corrupted world while keeping him able to carry out his work as a scribe. Following certain traditions, he went on writing in paradise or in the Garden of Eden. His removal from normal mortality made it possible for his work as heaven's recorder to continue. Third, consider his role as an example to follow. Enoch gave demonstration of what it meant to walk with God. This was not casual friendship. This was 300 years of faithfulness that never wavered. Day following day, year following year, decade following decade, century following century, he kept his relationship with the divine intact. He never faltered. He never made compromises. He never turned toward the wickedness that surrounded him on every side. His life became a measuring stick. The letter to the Hebrews points to him as someone who showed faith. His reward, being taken without death, made God's approval visible to all and permanent. Anyone who walked with God, the way Enoch did, could place hope in similar reward, not necessarily being taken without death, but certainly receiving vindication and eternal life. The timing of his being taken carries significance here. He was taken before the waters of the flood came. This meant he did not have to see his world destroyed completely. God kept that grief from him. But it also meant that his example of righteousness was removed before judgment came down. The earth was left with Noah, another man who was righteous, to keep humanity alive through the waters. Enoch being removed marked the moment when judgment could no longer be avoided. Fourth, think about his prophetic role. Enoch saw the complete sweep of events throughout history. His dream visions made known everything, from creation all the way to final restoration. He witnessed the pattern of rebellion, judgment, preservation, and restoration happening again and again across generations. He understood that what took place in his own time with the Watchers showed in advance what would take place repeatedly until the age that is final. This vision covering all things made him far more than a witness to one event. He became a prophet speaking to all times. His visions applied to those in his own day facing the flood. They applied to communities suffering under rulers from the Seleucid line. They applied to early Christians facing oppression from Rome. They applied to any community of the righteous surrounded by wickedness, waiting for God to step in. The prophetic role required that he be preserved. If Enoch had died in the normal way, he would rest among the righteous dead, waiting for resurrection. But his unique work called for something different. He needed to stay active, aware, carrying on his function as prophet and witness. Some traditions place him in paradise, where he continues to observe and to record. Others put him in heaven, changed into an angelic being. Either way, he remained consciously in service to God rather than sleeping in death. Fifth, think about the theological statement his being taken made. Death came into the world because of sin. Genesis chapter 3 put this consequence in place. The disobedience of Adam and Eve brought mortality to all humanity. Every name recorded in Genesis chapter 5 ends with the words, "And he died," the steady drumbeat of the curse. But Enoch interrupted that pattern. He did not die. His righteousness removed him from the universal sentence. This exemption declared a truth of great importance. The consequences of sin were not impossible to escape. Righteousness had power to overcome even death. The curse could be bypassed through perfect faithfulness. Enoch's being taken testified to hope. What sin had brought, devotion to God could reverse. The pattern of corruption and death did not have to be permanent. This theological point gained even more weight after the corruption spread by the Watchers. Violence covered the earth. Death multiplied. The offspring of the fallen angels destroyed people without number. Wickedness looked universal. In that setting, Enoch's being taken shone out like a light in darkness. The faithfulness of one man mattered. One life lived righteously could rise above the decay. God noticed and gave reward to those who kept their integrity despite corruption on every side. Sixth, look at the significance for the end of days. Some traditions suggest that Enoch will come back before the final judgment. The book of Revelation speaks about two witnesses who will prophesy during the final age. Many who interpret this identify these witnesses as Enoch and Elijah, the two men who never experienced death. They would come back to earth, give testimony against wickedness in its final form, and be killed as martyrs before being raised from death. Whether this understanding is correct or not, the fact that Enoch has been preserved makes him available for whatever service God might require. He stands ready to carry out any role God asks of him. His knowledge of history from its beginning to nearly its end makes him uniquely qualified for prophecy in the end times. He was present for the first great judgment that came by water. He could be present for the final judgment that will come by fire. His testimony would carry authority that cannot be matched. He saw with his own eyes everything that led up to the final crisis. The question, why was Enoch taken, therefore receives an answer with many layers. He was taken because his work as a witness against the Watchers required it. He was taken because his work as a scribe needed him to remain alive. He was taken because his example had to stand as permanent testimony to righteousness. He was taken because his prophetic vision served every generation. He was taken because his being taken showed that death could be overcome. He was taken because he might have service to give in the future. But under all these specific reasons rests a simpler truth. Enoch was taken because God loved him. The text says he walked with God. This speaks of close relationship, not merely right behavior. God and Enoch spent 300 years in deep fellowship. They knew each other in intimate ways. When the time came for Enoch to leave earth, God chose to spare him the pain of death. The taking was an expression of divine love toward one who had been faithful without exception. The account in Genesis captures this perfectly through its simplicity. It does not lay out elaborate theological reasoning. It simply states that Enoch walked with God, and God took him. The walking led directly to the taking. The relationship produced the reward. 300 years of faithfulness earned a departure that went around the grave. The man who lived for God escaped death itself. This truth makes Enoch's story relevant to every generation. Every age sees corruption. Every time period tests righteousness. Every era includes people who walk with God, while the world walks away from what God intends. Enoch stands as evidence that such faithfulness matters. He shows that God sees, that God remembers, that God rewards. He gives the promise that death, though it touches most humans, does not have to be the final word. The 7 verses that introduce Enoch in Genesis gave rise to an entire body of literature. That literature kept safe traditions about angels who fell, journeys through the cosmos, true knowledge of the heavens, prophetic views of history, and hope for the Anointed One. But at its center, the entire tradition comes back to one simple truth. There was a man who walked with God with such faithfulness that God refused to let death take him. That man was Enoch, 7th from Adam, the witness who lives forever, the scribe of heaven, the one who proved that righteousness can rise above even mortality itself.